The Green Knight, directed by David Lowery, who's made, amongst other things, movies such as The Old Man and the Gun, which I absolutely adored, and A Ghost Story, which I personally didn't like as much, but it was quite well received by the critics. This new film stars Dev Patel, Alicia Vikander, Joel Edgerton, Sarita Choudhury, if I spoke that right, Sean Harris and Barry Keoghan. It's an adaptation of one of the Arthurian legends, originally written as a poem and then rewritten, retold, and translated numerous times. And here's my recommendation: do at least read a summary of the original story before seeing this film. I think a lot of the things that it does are quite subtle and difficult to pick up on if you don't know the original themes and plot elements. So the story revolves around Sir Gawain, one of the Knights of the Round Table. On Christmas, an unexpected guest arrives at King Arthur's castle. It's a mysterious, huge green knight with a giant axe. He issues a challenge. He wants to challenge someone to a duel, and if that person manages to land a blow, then on the following Christmas, the next year, they will meet again, and the knight then has the one that landed a blow on the Green Knight. The knight has to offer the Green Knight a chance to return the blow exactly the same without protest, whether it's a heavy wound or just a nick. They have to do it. Gawain takes up the challenge, but when the Green Knight essentially refuses to attack and just shows his neck, he cuts off his head. And to the horror of everybody around the table, the knight gets back up, picks up his head, and says ominously, "1 year hence," and then rides out on his horse, cackling like a maniac. The year passes, and with Christmas approaching, Gawain eventually does venture out to try and find the Green Chapel, find the Green Knight, and honorably fulfill his oath. Now, there are two key interesting things about this adaptation. The first one, the more obvious one, is the form, the style. It's not a swashbuckling, merry medieval adventure with some fantasy elements. It is a very fantastical, weird, unusual, and unique film. It's trippy and bold. It definitely goes far into the fantasy territory. But it also draws on genres like horror. The world of the film is generally filled with magic, weird creatures, visions, and spirits, and it all has this eerie, ominous feel to it, like you're never safe. It's certainly a very adult film in that regard. Secondly, though, there are also significant changes to the nature of the story. In the original legend, at least as I remember it, Gawain was pretty much an exemplary knight, following the code of honor and living by his virtues, save for his one mishap towards the end of the story. This is completely flipped in the film. When we first meet him, he's a deadbeat guy, essentially. He's hanging around the town slums with his girlfriend, who, if I got that right, was a prostitute. He drinks all night, sleeps all day, doesn't do anything interesting, and so when King Arthur, at the first Christmas feast, invites him to sit with him and wants him to tell a story of his exploits, he's mortified. He says he doesn't have anything to talk about. He's unremarkable. He even himself states he isn't a knight yet. He's not even ready to become one. But then with the Green Knight's arrival, he's moved to action because of his desire to become someone great, to do something with his life. And as he goes on the journey, he's still not very knightly. On the contrary, in all his adventures on the way, he fails in some way. He's cowardly and incapable, he's self-centered, greedy. Most of all, he wants to become great, but whenever that notion is challenged by other characters that he meets, he doesn't have an answer to the question why he wants to be great or how he wants to be great. He just would like to preferably take a shortcut and be a great man, be revered by other people without ever learning how to be a good man in the first place. There is a fantastic shot early on in the film which essentially encapsulates the entire movie for me. So Gawain is riding out of the city and he's on the road some distance already from it. And the camera is in front of him, sort of looking back on him and moving backwards as he's moving forwards. And it's this wide, long shot. We see all the scenery behind it. And two very interesting things happen visually. First, there's a group of kids following Gawain around and cheering and playing that they're knights as well, but he ignores them. He's sitting straight up, being very serious. But then the kids fall off and turn back home, and a sort of like sheep shepherd comes between them and Gawain. And immediately you can see doubt and fear creep into his face, and his posture becomes kind of slumped. He immediately becomes a boy who still doesn't know what he's doing. And that's not all. Another thing, I mentioned two things. The second thing is the framing of that shot. The camera is in front looking back at Gawain, and on the right side of the shot we see the castle, the beautiful city around it, almost sparkling in the morning light. But on the other side, there's shadow, and there's this ruined building, just remnants of like a stone wall. And in between those two images, we have the straight road with Gawain upon it. And I thought that was a brilliant visual metaphor for the entire film, a man walking a thin line between greatness and ruin. And this is just one of the examples of the technical brilliance of the film. The cinematography in general is quite incredible, especially the way it plays with color and lighting. In some cases, very sparsely lighting the scene. In scenes that are very dark, sometimes like a single ray of light will just suddenly illuminate the key element, or the light will become red or green to change the mood of the scene. I also want to point out the music, which is terrific just as well, and perfectly sets the stage for all this fantastical medieval weirdness and also the philosophical journey which it serves. And here's the point that I also really want to make. I think that a lot of people will dislike the film because it subverts their expectations. Because you hear of a film based on the Arthurian legends and think to yourself, wow, this is going to be probably a fun, light-hearted adventure film. No, absolutely not. The Green Knight is the opposite. It's a slow, deliberate, careful exploration of the nature of life, ambition, character and virtue, and perhaps most crucially of failure. It's very introspective in quite unusual ways, and it can be pretty difficult to read, especially if you're unfamiliar with the source material. So I think it ends up being a film that requires real effort to really understand and appreciate it. Unfortunately for me, I like these kinds of films in general, and I also knew the original legend, and I also knew what I was signing up for with this particular film. So I have to say I was floored by it. I think it's a fantastic movie, very bold and decisive in what it's doing. It's unafraid to deviate from the source material, but it does so to tell a story of its own, which is perfectly drawn between all the metaphors. I do hope it gets the recognition it deserves, because it may not be the most accessible movie ever, but it is brilliant.